Good evening, Professor. Good evening, class. My name is Vincent, and I'm here to address or to add to this week's topic. This short presentation will try to address this week's question: does the tax code need fixing? So, I think in many ways you'll agree with me that the tax system is overly complicated. But this is because our tax laws are continually changing, and for the very reason it's very complex. Because our society is also constantly advancing, regulations must change. Unfortunately, laws usually lag to meet the people's needs. Changes are also sometimes one-sided, and which goes against the majority rule. The perennial question is, with the sweeping changes that the JA imposed, did it go far enough? Should the federal income tax system be reformed further? Is the system being fair to all taxpayers? And again, is it too complex? Is it too expensive to administer? And do I support these changes to these current tax laws? Furthermore, is it effective at raising revenue without impacting the personal, business, and financial decisions and operations adversely? So, to answer these questions, questions, it's a little bit more complicated than what I can explain in these slides, but I'll try. When establishing or ratifying laws, these prompts are some of the determinants that courts and Congress take into consideration, as you've mentioned. So let's define these changes. The most impactful change that I noticed that the did was reduce the tax rates for taxable income, as well as the change the thresholds for income tax brackets. The prior laws tax brackets were indexed using a CPI urban index. Under the new law, we're going to be using the changed CPI urban index, which is supposed to be a better metric for inflation. This changed the TCJA's indexing component, and this is permanent until ratification or taxation laws are passed. New taxation laws are passed. But with the change, it impacts filers more so than the other advantages. It will eventually cause us to end up in higher tax brackets. So, although the thresholds are lower with this indexing system, taxpayers will end up paying more since we'll be in higher tax brackets. Now, to dig a little deeper, let's look at the changes of these thresholds the results of these thresholds and how it impacted individual incomes and tax brackets and tax rates. For single filers making 9,525 to 38,700, tax rates is 12% today versus the older 15%. So for single filers making 38,700 to 82,500, tax rates is now 22% versus the older threshold of 38,700 to 93,700, that's taxed at 25%. So that's significantly lower. Now, for single filers making 82,500 to 157,500, the tax rate is 24 versus the older threshold of 93,700 to 93,700 to 195,000. That's taxed at 28%. So these changes continue as our tax brackets increase. The previous law did impose higher taxes, but the thresholds were way different, changing the whole dynamic. So for someone making 100,000 under the previous law, you'd be taxed at 28%, and today you'll be taxed at 24. That's a big difference, which can be a good thing, right? But for individuals making $157,000 or more, before you were taxed at 28%, and today you're going to be taxed at 32%. If you're at lower tax brackets, it may appeal to you, but for individuals at higher tax brackets, it may cause you to pay higher taxes or higher tax rates. Remember though, as I mentioned, due to the new indexing component, we may all end up at a higher tax bracket. Now, in addition to these tax changes, the TCJA also repealed personal independent exemptions. Instead, the new tax law imposes a higher standard deduction, which is great, actually. In addition to that, this new law imposes higher child tax credit and created a 500 tax credit for other types of dependents, which I believe to be a good thing. A higher credit, a higher deduction. Another great thing that the TCJA did was increase estate tax exemptions, doubling the prior laws standards to 11.2 million for single filers and 22.4 million for joint filers. For many with the ability to leave an inheritance for their family, this is a great thing. Unfortunately, some of the things that the Secure Act, which is a different law, in numerous ways negates some of this. But it's not all bad. You know, the Secure Act forces people with the ability to leave an inheritance wanting to secure generational wealth, forces them to cash out the inheritance in like less than 10 years or 10 years, which forces them to pay taxes on that within 10-year duration limit. But that's for another discussion. There are many that like the idea of the Affordable Care Act, but there's a lot of us that did not like the idea of having to pay a penalty for not having it, right? Well, the TCJA eliminated the American Care Act penalties that was imposed previously. So the biggest takeaway from all of this, in my opinion, is although that it does benefit a large number of people, depending on your earned income, it could be good or bad. My point is we can assume that we're all striving for a higher income, and indexing in this manner can eventually cause us more later on. Although also many of the tax provisions that the TCJA offered is not permanent. It's not a tax reform. So when tax laws change, this indexing, which is permanent, could impose hefty fees for those who are in a higher tax bracket, which, you know, like I said, we all strive to be in, right? So is it fair? I believe that it depends on what side of the coin you're on. We need to understand that these provisions for the most of us is temporary, but for businesses, these tax provisions do not sunset. So, in all fairness, you have to look at things subjectively. This law offers both good and bad. There are aspects to this that I like and I don't like. For small business owners, we have an added 20% deduction on qualified business income, which is a good thing. The doubling of 179 for direct expenses for businesses is a great thing, but I don't really invest much in capital acquisition, so it doesn't really do much for me. But it does for big businesses, you know. Components such as this offers more for big businesses than small businesses. And it doesn't really appeal to me, like I said, but because small businesses is a hefty portion of the economy and is a big contributor, you know, that's something you have to weigh and take into consideration. I do think that, you know, the tax system is extraordinarily complex, but complexity comes with its territory. Courts and Congress do have to take a lot of considerations into context. To address the prompt, well, is it too expensive to administer? Well, I guess the better question is, did it really enhance or improve economic growth, right? According to William G. Gale, an economist, and I referenced him later on, lowering the taxes paid by the big businesses actually resulted in reduced tax revenues. So again, is it fair? Again, my answer is depends on what side of the coin you're on. One thing I do know is that having your own business definitely has its own advantages. Now, is it effective at raising revenue without impacting business, personal, and financial decisions? Well, the Trump administration put it like this: said it would generate 1.8 trillion, and the cost would be 1.5 trillion. The Joint Committee disagrees, and Joint Committee in Taxation said that it would actually increase deficit by 1 trillion. So, I mean, on a personal level, how does this really affect us? How many people don't believe that it weighs it down to how many people don't believe that they actually got a tax cut? For 2018, my taxes, I actually paid lower taxes, right? When I looked at it. But then again, I got a relatively smaller tax return than before. So to some people like myself, I feel like we had an increase in taxes. But, for others in a different situation, many may feel differently. And since, we all have different particulars and we all live in different situations, it'll vary from person to person. So does the tax code really need fixing? Well, like I said, continuously, I said over and over again, it all depends. Differing points of views and situations will dictate your position on and your take on this. Depending on your current situation will dictate whether you want the tax laws to be changed, and others who believe that it's advantageous and that's paying less taxes and still receiving a decent amount, will not want any tax changes at all. It all varies in different complexities that we all have. Some people may depend on these tax returns as their bonus, and others don't really look at it and just put it into their savings or whatever the case may be. And others don't even receive refunds. So there's no simple solution to all of this because of personal and societal differences. Well, anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation, and my reference will follow in the next slide. Enjoy your day, and as always, be safe and be well.